this really intimidates me. So we've got things like whiting and PPK and silica, chromium oxide rather, titanium dioxide. Like, this is giving me serious flashbacks to all my chemistry classes in college. And chemistry, not my strong suit. I did a biology degree, and so I had to take years of chemistry, and it was hard. So I think that's a big reason I have avoided mixing my own glazes up until now. But glazes are expensive, and I want to kind of have more creative liberties with the glazes. So I'm trying this out in small batches. So this is very intimidating. And there's so many different kinds of glazes and so many different ingredients that are just, I mean, bentonite, I'm sure that's something important. I don't have a degree in ceramics, pottery stuff, so I took some classes, but mostly self-taught, and so all this is new to me, and I'm figuring out as I go. So, Old Forge Creations has these awesome recipes and a really cool blog about the first 5. So first 5 ingredients you need. And there's several different glazes to play off of those. So thank you very much for putting that out there. It's like a starter's guide, if you will. So I went with that. So we've got, I'm going to work with their floating base and the gloss base. And then I'm going to do a couple different add-ins to make like a blue glaze and a green glaze and a clear glaze. So I'm going to get started. I've got these little testers. Decided to make them this shape so I could see how if they pool on the bottom and how they look on texture. So this side's, it was supposed to be black. I think it's need more like gray. I mixed in some mason stain. And then my normal clay color on the other side. This is just some colored slip. So I can see what it looks like on, if it looks better over darker clay. I've got teeny tiny, very accurate scale. I've got some jars to mix up the different glazes in. I'm just doing small amounts. I've got some water, and I've got all these ingredients. So I've got the recipes. I will put links to these in the description. They're not mine, they're from Old Forge Creations, and I will experiment more in the future, but this sounds like a great jumping off point, and you gotta start somewhere. And again, I have never mixed my own glazes. I've only bought containers, but they're pricey, so this will be good. So to start with, I'm mixing up 100 gram amounts for testing, and so I want us to have 90 grams of water. So I'm going to start measuring up that, and then I will put my mask on before I start mixing the powders, because that is a safety hazard. So let me get started on the water. I'll measure those out first because I want to add the wet, add the dry to the wet, so I want to have the wet ready to go. So I'm going for 90 grams. Again, these are just small tester sizes. All right, 90 grams, success on the first one. Moving on. So this might not even be the right amount of water. It's just a starting point, and then you have to see what works from there. So that's the other reason I haven't really done this, is because not only does it remind me of chemistry in college, which was really hard, but it is there's so many factors that go into a good glaze. That even if you follow the recipe, your kiln might be different, your clay body will be different, and so it's going to look different. So, kind of stepping out into the unknown here. So I mentioned my classes in college being really hard, chemistry classes, but I remembered that I actually aced every single lab. Like, the classes were hard, but the labs, when you're actually like experimenting with things, I did really great in. So we're thinking this is chemistry lab and not like a chemistry quiz. Because I could do the labs. The labs were fun. For these first 5 glazes, that's what they're, need the recipes right here. So I need silica, which is not that one. I turned them around. Here we go. Silica. Okay, that's one of the ingredients. They also have ferrofrit in them. And then, I'm going to mispronounce this one, naphthalene cyanite, EPK. There we go. And whiting. Those are the first, so those are the ingredients. And then they also have, so those are the first 5. First 5 things you should have. And then also, this one calls for titanium dioxide and bentonite. So this one has that. That's the floating base. The gloss base does not have the titanium dioxide. And then I have chromium oxide for coloring, a mason stain, Victoria green for coloring, and copper carbonate for coloring as well. So this should give me some blues and greens, and this is the base, which should be clear. So I'm going to try a few different things. And okay, so I'm doing 6 glazes. I've got my 6 jars full of water, and I'm ready to go. Okay, I'm going to put on my mask, and I will do voiceover as needed. Because you can't really hear me with my mask on. I mixed these glazes up by adding all the ingredients to the same container. And you can do this a couple ways. Either zero out the scale after every ingredient. So if you add, say, 10 grams of one ingredient, then you can zero out the scale and then add the next ingredient. And that way you're weighing out each ingredient separately, but not dirtying a bunch of bowls. Or the even easier way is to add the ingredients together by weight. So on glazy.com, where I got these recipes, it has this feature, which is really cool. So say I need 10 grams of the first ingredient and 15 grams of the second ingredient. Instead of zeroing out the scale every time, you can just keep adding. So I could put in the 10 grams of the first ingredient and then add the second ingredient in until the scale reads 25 grams, which should be the 10 grams of the first ingredient plus 15 grams of the second ingredient. That's just different ways to accomplish the same thing. Either way, adding all the chemicals in the same bowl is just less mess. After weighing all the chemicals, I mixed them all together thoroughly. Some of the ingredients will clump and not mix properly if you just add them to water before mixing them with the other ingredients, so I mixed them first while they were all still dry. I then added the dried chemicals to the water in the jars and mixed them with my immersion blender. You can do this by hand, but this is better and faster. I repeated the same process with the different glazes that I wanted to try out, and then I let them sit overnight to make sure the glaze particles and the water mesh properly. I learned really that honestly, mixing glazes is not worlds different than mixing up, say, cookies. You just have to follow directions, add the right things at the right times, in the right amounts, and it's really not that hard. I certainly still have a lot of things to learn about mixing and testing glazes, but the actual process was less hard than I thought. The next day, I mixed up the batch of glaze again with my immersion blender, and then dipped the little tester pieces into the different glazes. I did a few glaze combos as well that I'll explain when I show the results here in a few minutes. The water content and length of time spent dipping each piece is something that I will experiment with in the future. At this point, I was just doing a fairly quick dip and hoping they would come out as a glaze at all. A new development in my studio, I started mixing my own glazes. And it took me a while to get to that point because I found it really, really intimidating. So here are the first results, and they're mostly green. I need to work on some color variation, but they look like glazes, and I'm super happy with that. So I just did these little test, little cup things, and this is black slip on this side that I dyed with mason stain, and that's just my regular clay body. So I wanted to see what it looked like on different things, on different colors. You can see a little bit of blue in there. Oh, a little bit of blue in there. So I think this one, if I mix more of the oxides in there, that would be more what I was looking for. But I'm so happy they're even glazes. Because I'm telling you, this took me a long time to get to this point. Because I'm gonna mess it up. It's chemistry. Ah, scary. But it wasn't that bad. It was not that bad. So this is a clear. That looks really good. Like it looks like a clear glaze. Look, I succeeded in something. There's some little bit of color variation there too. That's what I was going for, the color variation on some of these. That one was supposed to be clear. but see a little bit there? So I have a jumping off point now, and I'm really super happy with that. Yeah, they look pretty much all the same. I did do just 6 glazes, and then I tried a couple different combos, so there's not going to be a whole lot of variation. See, this one's darker. See? Different. Here are the glazes together. They look so good. Yes, they're mostly green, where I was hoping for a little more blue, and yes, I have a bunch more experimenting to do, but I'm just so happy they're really glazes, and they look so great. I was honestly expecting the worst when I opened the kiln because, well, I just need to work on my confidence. Now I'm going to go through the glaze results one at a time. The first glaze was the floating base glaze by itself, and it would work for a clear glaze. It does have some white showing in some of the spots where it's pooling, so I would use it more for a base glaze, which is what it's really intended for anyway. It's a good glaze, just maybe better to mix some colors into it. Next, we got the floating base with 1% copper carbonate. This one I think would have been better with maybe 2% copper carbonate. It was starting to show some of the colors that I wanted, a little bit of blue, but definitely worth experimenting with more. This third glaze was a floating base with 1% chrome oxide. This is obviously a strong colorant and made this nice deep green. This one is worth repeating and experimenting with for sure. This one was the floating base with 2% of the Victoria Green Mason stain. It's a nice light green color. I'm not sure there was much point in using the floating base specifically for this. The gloss base would have been very much the same, as the Mason stain is going to provide a solid color, and the floating base is really better for maybe an oxide that are going to show color variation on a floating base glaze. It's a good color, just maybe I'll use the gloss base with Mason stains going forward. Next up was just the gloss base by itself. This one is a really good, reliable, perfectly clear dipping glaze. I actually ended up mixing up a big batch of it after testing it because it's so good. I really like it, and it goes well over underglazes also. The next glaze I did was the gloss base with 4% Victoria Green Mason stain. This one is very similar to the other one with Mason stain, just a darker color. So depending on what green I'm going for, this is a good glaze. After making these test pieces, I actually used the same glaze with varying levels of Mason stain in them for some trees that I made, and they turned out great. In addition to the glazes by themselves, I also did some combos of one glaze overlapping another to see what would happen. I ended up with more green with hints of blue here and there. Nothing too spectacularly different than the original glazes I mixed up. So I'll just show you these while I am talking. And I'll put the glazes on the screen. I have some things I've come away with from this experiment. Firstly, mixing glazes isn't that hard. And it's good to try new things that are out of your comfort zone. This was very intimidating to me, but you know what? It's not that bad. And now that I've tried it, I'm going to have to try more glaze tests with more or less mixed in colors to see what happens, and more or less concentrations of glazes. And I may have a glaze load running right now that has a bunch more tests in it, so I'm officially down the rabbit hole. And I'm very grateful to Old Forge Creations for posting the first 5 glazes. I really appreciate people sharing their knowledge, and I try to do the same, so thank you very much for that. And thanks for all of you for watching my video. Be sure to check out this one next, because I tried something else that I've never done before when I made a duck mold and then hid pottery ducks around a cruise ship. You don't want to miss that one, so see you in the next video.